light up your night with The Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Do you like to ask questions about everything? Would you like to escape from your proverbial box, just leap out and explore our world in ways you've never imagined? You can have that opportunity. As we grow and expand, new features will be added, allowing you to experience radio programming at a fresh new level. I invite you to join me, November Hanson, host of Voice of the People. Together, we can expand our horizons and peer into multifaceted possibilities. This program will broadcast live Saturday evenings on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of The Joyner Report, streaming live around the planet via the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, as well as broadcasting on WPRN FM in New Orleans. I'd like to give a shout out to our listeners in the Big Easy. I certainly appreciate y'all spending the evening with us, as usual. Additionally, you can listen to the show on your cell phone by dialing 704-631-4060 and entering the station ID code 2899. I'm Frank Warren, editor and publisher of the UFO Chronicles, returning as your guest host tonight while Angela is taking a break in the action. For the latest in UFO news, as well as its history, you can find us at www.theUFOchronicles.com. Yesterday, of course, was Veterans Day, and my guests tonight were chosen in part to honor and acknowledge all of our veterans with a special salute to former Captain Bob Salas and retired Colonel Dwin Arnie Arneson. Bob will be on shortly, and Arnie will bat cleanup in the second hour. For newcomers to the show, one of the things unique to the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on the Internet side is the fact that not only can you listen to the show, but you can participate in the conversation in real time using the software known as Paltalk. I like to call it our virtual auditorium, or V-Room, if you will. The software in question downloads in minutes, it's relatively easy to use, and enables you to posit questions to either myself or my guests in real time. If you currently don't have Paltalk and you'd like to give it a try, you can Google it, or better yet, go to the UFO Chronicles, which again is at www.theUFOchronicles.com, and at the bottom of the article for tonight's show, you'll see the links to a step-by-step procedure of how to download the software and navigate to the room for this particular episode. In taking a peek in the V-Room, it looks like we've got another good crowd. I know many of you are eager to ask our guests some questions, and as usual, I'd like to ask that you hold off a bit, at least until we get into the show's ways. You'll know when. As most of our listeners are aware, a press conference of historic proportions took place at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on September 27th, approximately 6 weeks ago. The conference was hosted by noted researcher Robert Hastings and tonight's guest, Bob Salas. Together they presented 6 former U.S. Air Force officers and 1 former enlisted man, one of the group, of course, being Colonel Arneson, my second guest tonight. These men, for the first time, collectively revealed their own dramatic experiences involving UFOs at nuclear weapon sites. The goal was to garner worldwide media attention to this vital issue by presenting the testimony of highly credible individuals who witnessed extraordinary encounters, i.e. UFOs, seemingly monitoring and sometimes tampering with our nuclear weapons and or facilities. These events, which have officially been kept secret for decades. personally, as a researcher, I think I can safely speak for the majority in saying we always want more in regards to response to the media. However, suffice it to say, the goal was in fact achieved based on the feedback in various mainstream venues. Bob Salas, a former U.S. Air Force captain, was a Minuteman I launch officer. His specific title was a Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander. While on duty at Malmstrom Air Force Base's Oscar flight on March 24, 1967, all of his missiles malfunctioned and dropped off alert status. Simultaneously, one of his guards reported a UFO hovering over the launch control facility's security fence gate. Salas and his missile commander, now retired Colonel Fred Mywald, were debriefed about the incident and asked to sign non-disclosure statements by an agent from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or OSI. Mywald has confirmed that shortly after the malfunctions occurred, a two-man security alert team was sent out to one of the flight's missile silos to investigate a tripped alarm there. Upon approaching the site, the team saw a second or possibly the same UFO hovering near it, whereupon they became frightened and quickly returned to the launch control facility. Bob is also the co-author of Faded Giant, which relates the events of March 24, 1967 in great detail, along with his personal journey into research and the evidence he's uncovered. It's a great honor for me to welcome this veteran and patriot to tonight's show. Bob, welcome to the Joyner Report.
Frank, thank you for having me. You've been a great supporter, and it's just an honor for me to be here with you.
Well, as I've always said, I've got your back. And
Okay.
First and foremost, on behalf of myself and our listeners, I'd like to not only thank you, Bob, for your service to this country, but for your courage in stepping forward in discussing these events, the things that we deem so important to not only the American people, but literally everyone on the planet.
Well, thank you. I consider it a responsibility to report on these events. I've been doing this for now 15 years now, talking about this openly, and I at times thought I was through, but it seems like I've got to keep going until we get some action. Obviously,
well, unfortunately, you're on a very short list, and my hat is off to you. And one of the things that before we went live. You have to keep chipping at this, as you and I have agreed upon, and we do get results when we do chip away at it. In fact, I wanted to ask you earlier this afternoon, we did get a new witness that was a commander at one of the launch facilities at another Air Force base. He's a little bit nervous about going public. He has agreed so far to an interview with me, and I hope to talk to him in the next few days. But it's very exciting, and he had similar events. His buttons on his console went haywire. One button, he said, specifically showed a launch mode. And this is a direct result from the press conference that you and Robert Hastings put together a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's one of the things we were really hoping for, that not only the press would get involved and talk about this more, but that men in and out of service would come forward with their stories. And I'm really heartened to hear that you do have an additional witness coming forward to you, and I think I've heard a couple of rumors that other people might be coming forward too. So we'll just have to see what that holds. But this happened, of course, after I started talking about it on the Art Bell Show, and this is way back in 1996. Mm-hmm. I heard from Robert Kaminsky, who was the chief Boeing investigator for the Echo shutdown. And so it really helps to come forward and talk about this, and more people come forward too.
And speaking of Kaminsky, we do have at the UFO Chronicles a snippet from an audio interview that he did several years ago. Kaminsky, unfortunately, has passed away, but we do have that few-minute snippet of that interview done, I forget what year it was, where he confirms UFO activity in his position as an engineer for Boeing. So he is yet another witness added to the collective. Before we get too far into the UFO minutia, I want to do something that is often overlooked, and we spoke about this before we went on. If you would, for our listeners, and specifically the younger listeners, I'm wondering if we could just kind of paint the time, so to speak, kind of give, given an idea of the flavor of what was going on. For example, 1967, we're in the middle of the Cold War. We were brought to the brink, literally, of nuclear war not too many years earlier. Folks were still building bomb shelters. Schools were still doing nuclear attack drills, as I remember when we used to have to crawl under our desks. Why don't you go ahead and pick it up from there and just kind of describe, get a tone of that time period, and then in relationship to your job.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a tense time. Of course, Vietnam was going on. We were still involved with the Cold War. We didn't know if China was going to get involved in the Vietnam War, and of course, China had nukes at that time. So it was very sensitive, and I make this point in the book that because of that, the Air Force would have been loath to do something to shut down missiles intentionally. So that's another rationale for this not being some kind of an Air Force exercise. We had every reason to keep all those missiles on full alert.
Well, and to the point, there are a lot of naysayers try to put a conventional spin on it in the sense that it may in fact have been some sort of exercise. But as you correctly point out, tensions were high. In fact, this is fodder for another show, but there were a lot of near accidents that almost put us into nuclear war a number of times that didn't get into the public domain. But what was could you describe for the listeners what your day as a deputy commander in a missile silo, what did it entail? What was the natural day for you? I would imagine most of it was pretty boring.
Yeah, I guess you could call it pretty boring. We would go to a briefing first before we went out on alert, and they'd tell us, things like road conditions and whether or not there were any activities in the field that we ought to be aware of, and maintenance activities in particular at our flight. So, and then we went driving out to Oscar Flight, which was over 100 miles from the base. So if the weather was good, we'd drive, or we'd be helicoptered out. It depended. We get out there, we relieve the crew. We get debriefed by the crew there, and if we had maintenance activity, of course we had to be aware of that. But mostly, if nothing was going on, we'd just stand by on alert and check our systems now and then to make sure that everything was okay. We'd have if we had any security violations going on, we'd have guards going back and forth and checking things out. It was fairly routine. And so what I would be doing much of the time would be studying, because I was studying for a master's degree in engineering. At the time, they had a program, and that was one of the attractions for the program, to get your master's degree while you were on alert status or alert duty on. So I was usually doing a lot of homework.
Actually, this new witness mentioned something to that effect as well. In regards to maintenance, a two-man team, three-man team, how did that work?
It varied. Of course, usually if maintenance was going to open up the facility and go into the launcher, they'd have to have a guard with them. So they would have to check in before they opened up the outer fence, and then make regular checks to our security people. It was usually, I'd say, 3-4 people, maybe tops, for a maintenance team.
And I got the impression that was not uncommon. I mean, there was routine maintenance, and these guys would sleep in a camper. Is that how that worked? If they stayed overnight?
Yeah, if they had to stay overnight, and sometimes they did, they would have camper out there and spend the night there. And I think that was the situation at Echo Flight before their missiles went down. I think at two of the sites they had maintenance teams and security guards out at two of the sites that evening.
Right. As I recall, I think, yeah. That. Now, as far as security, the security teams floated from silo to silo, or were there specific people attached to one silo?
Well, our security teams would be assigned to a particular launch control facility, and then they would maybe take routine checks now and then, and then just stand by in case there was some kind of we got a missile incursion. Every now and then we got, an incursion into the launch facility. Mm-hmm. Every now and then we got, a jackrabbit jump the fence, or maybe a deer brush against the fence, something like that. And then we'd have send
there
guards.
Was a type of radar. Wasn't there a type of radar to detect movement?
It wasn't radar. It was more motion detectors.
I see. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God forbid, and this is something that I've never heard you talk about specifically, but I think this is important to the flavor of the times. What would precipitate a nuclear launch? In other words, what, obviously if we had inbound missiles coming in, but could you describe a scenario where you would literally launch nuclear missiles?
Well, of course, we were not privy to any scenario. All we had to do was if we got a message, and of course these messages were crypto messages, and they'd have to be deciphered. But if we did get a message to launch, there were certain procedures that we had to go through. So it's not like we were listening to the news down there to make, if World War III was about to happen.
Right.
Usually we had to go through DEFCONs. You're probably familiar with Defense Condition Readiness numbers, and normally we're in DEFCON 5, and then if it got down to 2, then war was imminent, and DEFCON 1, I think, was we were at war.
Did you ever experience a DEFCON lower than 5 at any time during your service?
No. Well, I think possibly we had gone to 4 at one during my time there, but I know during the Cuban Missile Crisis they were at DEFCON 3. Now,
to be clear, it's just you and Mywald in your silo. Is that correct? In your launch facility?
Yeah, that's right. Underground in the capsule. We just had a commander and a deputy. At the time, I was a deputy. Later on, I became a commander myself.
Now, I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me.
Okay.
Had you gone down to DEFCON 1, I mean, if war was imminent between you and Mywald after authentication and going through all the crypto messages and whatnot, it was within your power and Fred's power to literally launch nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
That's correct. It just took 2 of us to do it. That's right.
Now, the reason that what I'm trying to get at this is the importance of your job and you being in there under the control of these nuclear weapons. And quite frankly, so many of the naysayers tend to poo-poo witnesses and so forth and so on. My point is that the caliber of your character and training and so forth puts you in what would arguably be one of the most important positions at the time in the world. I mean, you literally, in essence, had your finger on the proverbial button that could launch World War III, which quite arguably, again, could be the end of the world as we know it. Because we were in the Cold War. I mean, we launched, they launch. Next thing you know, you've got a salvo of nuclear weapons going across the oceans. I think this is something that is often overlooked. Just how important not only you but all of the other witnesses, what their jobs were in regards to these nuclear weapons, and also how important it is when unidentified objects are reported in close proximity. I mean, just in turn, a lot of people like to put the UFO spin on it, but just the importance in the safety that's involved when you have an unknown in close proximity to our nuclear defenses. And by the way, of course, there is a history of this since the beginning of what we deem modern-day ufology since 1947. I mean, in the summer of 47, we had UFOs reported at Hanford. We had them reported at Oak Ridge in Tennessee. The Savannah River Project, we had them reported at Los Alamos. Of course, everybody has heard of Roswell, but they were also reported when Roswell turned to Walker. There was another base in Texas that had nuclear weapons, Air Force Base. They were reported there. There is a habit, there is a pattern of UFOs reported in and or around nuclear weapons facilities. And, I can't, to me, that is so important, to us as American citizens, but obviously it would be to any military faction. Now, okay, that said, and I hope our listeners have kind of got an idea of what was going on at the time. I mean, the tensions were pretty tough. Again, years earlier, we were just this close to going into a nuclear war with the then Soviets. Take us back to March 24th and explain to our listeners what happened from your perspective in your particular event with Oscar Flight.
Okay, real quick again. March 24th, Fred Meiwald and I were on alert status. Fred was on a rest break. We had a little cot down there. And so I get a call from the flight security controllers, topside, and he's telling me that they've been seeing strange lights in the sky, making really strange maneuvers. They didn't think they were airplanes. They were noiseless. But very strange maneuvers, going very fast and turning on a dime, things like that. I even joked about the possibility of you mean UFOs? And he said, well, I couldn't explain what was going on. Now, of course, I didn't take this as any kind of a joke. He was serious. Of course, if it had been a joke, they would have laughed about it and gotcha and that sort of thing. But anyway, I kind of dismissed it. I had a good book going, so I kind of hung up the phone on him. But 5 minutes later or so, he calls back, and this time he's obviously frightened. He's screaming into the phone, yelling, "Sir, we're looking at a glowing red object. It's pulsating light. It's hovering above the front gate, about 30 feet long." Scared to death. They got all the guards out there with their weapons drawn. Wanted me to tell them what to do next. Of course, I was kind of in shock. First thing that came to my mind, we might be under some sort of an attack. So I told him make sure nothing comes in the perimeter fence. And then he quickly said he had to go because one of the guards got injured. It turned out the injury was minor. One of the guards was so frightened, I think he tried to climb the fence, which had a barbed wire on it. So he hung up. I went over to talk to Fred Meiwald, and just as I was about to tell him about the phone calls, we got a lot of bells and whistles down there, lights going off, and the missiles started shutting down. We had one by one, and I recall all 10 of them shut down. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we had to report at the command post. We had to go through some procedures, get maintenance people out there. We had security lights also, so I called back upstairs, and I asked about the UFO, and the guard said that it had flown off. It was gone. But we did have lights, security lights, so I had to send guards out. The guards went out to one or two of the facilities, and again, they reported back seeing this object flying over or hovering over one of the launch sites. So they hightailed it back, and so, but eventually the security alarms were reset. We were able to reset them, and so we didn't have to send the guards back out there. But That was it in a nutshell. The next day we were relieved. Immediately went up, talked to that guard, and made sure he was serious and telling me the truth. And again, I want to point out that they had no ability to affect our missiles in any way from the top. They had no controls up there.
No, none of the men on duty, in other words. No
right.
Maintenance men or security men. Nobody could have fiddled around with anything.
That's right. We had all the controls downstairs. I mean, underground, and so it couldn't have been a hoax, and they couldn't have timed such a hoax to as our missiles shut down for no good reason.
Now, let me ask you this, Bob. For a short period of time there, if I understand this correctly, you were unable, if you had to launch nuclear weapons in the defense of the United States of America, you were unable to do so. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let me remind our listeners that the conclusion of Project Blue Book in 1969, the Air Force in their official statement via the Condon Report acknowledged the reality of UFOs. However, in the same sentence, they said they were not a threat to national security. Now, what you've just explained for the thousandth time, and God bless you for doing it, is that while a UFO was hovering, an unidentified flying object, and that's all we're calling it in this episode, was in close proximity over the missile launch facility, your nuclear missiles went down and became inoperative. Had we gone to DEFCON 1, you would not have been able to launch the nuclear weapons. Now, if that isn't a threat to national security, I don't know what is.
I absolutely agree.
I don't see how anybody can argue that point at all. It's just inarguable. It's not defensible. Okay. So the next day you're debriefed. Take us through that, if you would.
Yeah, we're helicoptered back right away and ordered to go to our squadron commander's office. We walk in. First thing I ask him is, was this some kind of an Air Force exercise? And he assured me it was not. He was white as a sheet, couldn't explain what had happened. We briefly told him from our side what happened, and but there was a guy from AFOSI there, Air Force Office of Special Investigation, and all he was concerned about was getting us to sign these non-disclosure statements. I kind of balked at that at first because we already had above top secret clearances, both of us, and if my commander told me, not to talk about it, well, I was ordered not to talk about it. I wouldn't do it. But he insisted that we sign these documents, and about this specific incident, we did, and that was it. But from that point on, we were not supposed to talk about it to anybody. I think the next day, I got a call from one of those guards begging me to come and talk to him about what he had seen, and I couldn't do it. I had to turn him down. I said I'm not allowed to talk about this anymore. So unfortunately, I was never able to talk to any of the guards again about this.
Well, obviously he was pretty shook up.
He was. They were all shook up, and they really wanted just to get some closure on, just to talk about it. But
sure.
I couldn't.
Well, their attitude, like yours at the time, was, of course, prior to the incident, it's like the initial call, as you said, you didn't take it seriously. Really, you kind of dismissed it. I mean, UFOs, that's silly nonsense. That was the mindset.
Right.
That was the public's mindset at the time. That
Right.
that's just silly. Of course, then he's up topside. He's actually experiencing all this and then relating it down to you. And as is the case with most witnesses when they have a UFO experience up close and personal, it does have a profound effect on them and oftentimes changes the witness's life, as it has done with yours, obviously. In fact, to that end, I want to interject one thing, too. Back to the flavor of the times, March 24th In fact, days before and days after, in Montana, in that area, and I have the AP article that states that there were UFO reports all over the state of Montana, I might add. In particular, we had the incident in Belt, Montana, which was reported that a craft had actually had either landed or got very close to the ground, and the Malmstrom Air Force Base investigated that, along with the Sheriff's Department. Which, in fact, as the report goes, they did find physical evidence in the sense of broken bushes and broken tree limbs and that kind of thing where this incident was supposed to have taken place. Now, that's a singular incident in Belt, Montana, but there was UFO activity all over the area, according to the newspaper reports of the time. So it's not a stretch, obviously, in that remote area. Given the fact that there was UFO reports all over the state in the vicinity, that one would fly over one of the nuke launch facilities by accident, if not in fact on purpose, in my mind anyway. Okay, you've got debriefed. Was there anything in the days that followed that was related to any of that in terms of reports or other UFO activity or anything at all? Did it just go to sleep?
Well, like you said, I remember, I think the day after coming home from Alert, picking up the newspaper and reading about reports of UFOs all over the state, like you said. But as far as information from my commander or anybody in the Air Force about any activity after that, it was nothing, absolutely nothing. We never got debriefed about our own incident, even though I knew there was activity. There was activity going on, as I later found out. Investigations were going on, and there was kind of a panic mode. And of course, this was during the Condon Committee investigation period. As you know, Condon Committee was investigating UFOs for the Air Force under contract, and I'm sure the Air Force wanted to keep this very hush-hush and away from the Condon Committee.
Well, and and obviously this would be a pretty hefty case, but they seem to have ignored it, opposed to some of the other, say, milder cases that they did take a look at. I mean, what could be more important than UFO activity at nuclear weapons facilities, for God's sake? But,
as you know, I wrote up an article on how the Condon Committee failed to report about this, and even though their chief investigator, Dr. Roy Craig, was well aware of at least the Echo Flight incident and probably the Oscar incident soon after it happened. So they obviously avoided investigating this, and they had names to investigate. They knew who they had to talk to about this, but they didn't do it.
Well, and of course this comes back, it brings the Bolander memo to mind in regards to serious cases or cases that might affect national security. They bypass the Blue Book end of it, which basically most sober ufologists feel was just a PR campaign anyway. That was just a front. But serious cases or ones that might affect national security went up the line. And of course, obviously, this would be the case, of course. Now, you're sworn to secrecy, so you have a little bit of activity. You hear some scuttlebutt the days that followed, but I'm presuming that as time went on, that just went to the wayside, and you got back to your life and your normal activities.
Right. Never heard another word about it while I was there at all.
When did it pop back up? When did this resurface? I mean, obviously, it always stayed with you to some degree, but when did it surface again for you? Yeah,
it surfaced again in 1994. I was out of the Air Force by then. I resigned my commission in 1971. In 94, I was in Seattle in a bookstore, picked up Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. I happened to turn to page 301, and there was a short paragraph there about missiles going down at Malmstrom Air Force Base for strange reasons, and UFOs were reported. And I got kind of excited about that. I thought, gee, that must be my incident. And so maybe the Air Force declassified it. So I actually contacted MUFON. I got a hold of James Klotz, who was my co-author of my book, and asked him to submit FOI requests for documents, and not to mention anything about UFOs, just about these missiles going down under unusual circumstances. And so he did, and lo and behold, the Air Force writes back, says, this is classified, but since it's been so long, we're going to declassify it. We're going to send you some documents. So they did. And go ahead.
Was the part in Above Top Secret, which I have here in front of me somewhere, was that did that come from Ray Fowler originally?
Yes. It came from Ray Fowler. Of course, Ray Fowler was working for Sylvania at the time of the Echo and Oscar shutdowns, and from his people at Malmstrom, Ray Fowler was on the East Coast, but he heard from his people that of these incidents and that UFOs had been involved. And Ray was working, I think he was part of NICAP, I believe.
Yes.
And so he was interested in the subject of UFOs. He later was asked by the Christian Science Monitor, I think in 1972. The Christian Science Monitor interviewed him, and Ray told him all about what he had heard about the Echo shutdowns, and almost lost his job over that. But I think that's where Timothy Good heard about the Echo shutdowns and then put it in his book.
My hat's off to Tim. He's an excellent researcher.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, Fowler has spoken recently. He wasn't there at the press conference, but he has lent his voice and reiterated what happened. So he in fact, he is another witness to the collective of witnesses in regards to the preponderance of all the witness in support of the activity at Echo and Oscar flights. I might add. One of the things that I don't think is clarified enough. Now, and I'll have to say that I've been privy to listen to a lot of the telephonic recordings that both you and Robert Hastings had performed, which are absolutely fascinating. And I might add, they shore up everything that you've been saying word for word for years. With the people, with the witnesses that were there and involved, for example, like Walter Fiegel in regards to Echo Flight, and of course your commander Fred Mywald. But what I got in listening to all these different people, at malfunctions to that degree were very rare. In fact, for 10 missiles to go down at the time, that was unprecedented. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I was on duty for 3 years at Malmstrom as a deputy and then again as a commander, and rarely did one missile go down and stay down. So for multiple missiles to go down at any time was extremely rare. Yeah.
Well, and I'm going somewhere with this. My point, and I was having this debate the other day, as I mentioned to you earlier. You as a researcher and as a witness, so many years after the fact, it's now 1994. You've got Klotz in there giving you a hand. He's doing FOIA requests, and you get some stuff declassified. It mentions the missile malfunctions, and I think they've got one line in there. I think they mentioned UFOs once, which they just kind of poo-pooed that. But the fact is that they did admit 10 missiles going down. Now, my argument is, since that was unprecedented and these malfunctions were so rare, specifically for 10 missiles, it's a very plausible explanation to me and most sensible people that obviously you would think that that was the flight that you were involved in, for the simple fact that these things didn't happen. I mean, they were rare. And I bring this up because the naysayers, and you've been fighting this battle for years, they want to use that against you in regards to the early confusion that you had between Echo and Oscar flights. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Of course, all these capsules look the same inside. There's nothing to really to distinguish one from another. Even the launch facilities are almost identical. I must say at times, if a particular squadron, I was in the 490th Squadron, and of course I remembered that. I've even still got my jacket which says 490th Missile Squadron on it. I knew I was in the 490th, and the 490th only handled Kilo Lima Mike November and Oscar. But still, the incident that was reported was so identical to what I recall that I thought I might have been there. I was there because at times when there were some crews that were sick, they would ask other squadrons to pitch in and take over a flight. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that I could have been an Echo flight, and that's what I thought when I first read that. It wasn't until much later when I was able to contact Fred Mywald that he corrected me and said, "Oh no, we were at Oscar flight," and by then I had already been speaking out quite a bit on this incident, but I later corrected it, and of course we were at Oscar flight, not Echo flight.
And was Fred the first one that you got a hold of from back then?
No, actually I got a hold of the Echo flight crew first and talked to them. Matter of fact, I think Don Crawford, who was also a member of the 10th Squadron, which and he went out to Echo flight, was the first one I contacted. And so it was a process of first trying to recall who the heck my commander was at the time. For a long time, I didn't remember. Like you say, it was a long period of time. I had gone through some personal problems. I went through a divorce in 1968, and I got remarried. I had children. Just living life.
Sure,
you
going on.
Forget these little details. Yeah.
Right. You bet. Yeah. Okay. So, so you got a hold of Crawford first. Then you got a hold of Fiegel.
I think so. I think it went in that sequence, and then after Fiegel, I got a hold of Carlson.
Right.
And then after that, I think I got a hold of Mywald. I think Mywald was after that.
In that order. Now we know, of course, today that Fiegel and Carlson was the commander of Echo Flight, and Fiegel was in your position. He was deputy commander.
Right.
And again, of course, now at this point, when you got a hold of Fiegel, or at least when you interviewed Fiegel on the phone, at that point, you were aware that you were at Oscar flight. You had uncovered enough information at that point.
Well, I guess that's right. When I got a hold of Fiegel, I realized that he was at the Echo flight and I was at Oscar flight. Or, also the one of the reports, the unit history report, talks about investigators interviewing November flight security guards. Now, at one point, I thought I could have been at November flight because, again, like I said, I was a commander after my teaming up with Mywald. I became a missile crew commander, and I was at November flight more often than not. So, again, this was part of the confusion of, at one point I may have said maybe I was at November flight.
Right. Well, my point is that this is a complete plausible explanation. And I got into this debate with a naysayer the other day, and I said, I realize it's easier for you. You'd like to throw stones and call people that you don't know and veterans of the United States Air Force liars and so forth and so on, or that you think that their motivation is the riches that they get off of a UFO book. And I said, quite frankly, it's all ludicrous. And I said the only thing that should be coming out of your mouth is thank you for your service to this country. But the point is, myself as a researcher, I go where the evidence takes me. And you have to look at plausibility in anything. And I think all of this makes a complete sense. And again, what sticks with me is the rarity of the event. I mean, one thing that everybody is in agreement with is that for 10 missiles to go down, it was unheard of. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Fiegel says that on tape. I think in the first interview with you, he point blank says that it was unheard of.
I believe you're right. Mm-hmm. I believe you're right about that.
Yeah, obviously, you would think when you're going through the fog of memory, and you do uncover the information, or you get the via the Freedom of Information Act request, you get the data from the Air Force, and it says echo. Certainly, you would think that that's what it was. Now, getting to Fiegel. And by the way, having listened to the entire telephonic interview, which just had me at the edge of my seat, and by the way, for our listeners, 3 of the recorded interviews are at the UFO Chronicles under the article the Witch Hunt, written by the Echo Flight Witch Hunt, I think is what Hastings entitled it. You can search the site and you'll find it, and you can listen in their own words. You can listen to Walt Fiegel, Fred Mywald, and we also have Kaminsky in there, and two of the audio tapes, snippets with Fiegel. Now, the interesting thing that I found in the first interview that you did with Fiegel, that not only did he verify the UFO activity over Echo Flight, he did so enthusiastically, I felt. I mean, it was like, I don't want to oversell it, but you could, the difference in tone between your first interview in '96, was it?
Right, it was 96.
Yeah, and then later, I think Robert interviewed him in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Now, although he confirmed all the activity in 2008, the enthusiasm wasn't there as it was with you. I mean, between your event, what you were sharing with your personal experience, and what he was sharing, it was like two kids in the candy store. I mean, he was very, very enthusiastic about sharing this information, I felt.
Right. You have to understand, when we first contacted each other, it was just like old friends. We knew each other at the time, of course, and it was just good to hear from an old friend. And, of course, he was kind of excited to tell me, his incident, and I relayed my incident, and it was just good times.
Right.
In 2008, of course, he realized that I was outspoken about this. I'd been speaking about it, and now he was a little more conservative because, good grief, I mean, he's still working in the industry, or he was at the time.
Sure.
And so he's worried about his reputation, of course.
Yeah, and to be clear, he was certainly conservative, but he confirmed everything once again in 2008. I've listened to that tape now probably a half a dozen times. He doesn't, and he's also clear. I think he used the phrase, "I don't believe in UFOs, but this is what happened." So right. He's clear on his own personal opinion, but he does not deny the events that took place. And I think that's important because there's so many naysayers out there. Well, not so many, but there's a contingent that keeps trying to say that Fiegel didn't say what he said. And, of course, you can listen to it in his own words at the UFO Chronicles on those tapes. And there's no if, and, or maybe. He is clear, and he says so on a number of occasions in each one of the telephonic interviews. You asked point-blank questions, he answered them. And Robert asked point-blank questions, and he answered them in the affirmative in regards to UFO activity when the missiles went down. And, by the way, all the activity in the Echo Flight incident, all the activity afterwards, because a lot of the big wheels came rolling in, as I recall, that he admitted to, in regards to debriefing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. He told me that he had been interviewed at SAC headquarters or by SAC headquarters, and they were very interested in his logs, and there was a lot of brass in the area, so absolutely.
And he said, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he wrote a very detailed log when you interviewed him.
Yes. And he said, he even told me then that he had a copy of that log and was going to look for it, but I've never heard back from that.
Yeah, I do recall him saying that. I thought that was interesting, because his demeanor, by the time Hastings interviews him, his demeanor is completely different. And of course, since then, if we presume the hearsay from other people, that perhaps he's now trying to backpedal. Let me throw in this too. I don't know the man. I listened to those lengthy interviews that you did with him, as well as Hastings, and he seems like a decent guy, upstanding guy, and he's a veteran. And I mean, he has all of my respect as far as that goes. And I don't know what the situation is about what we've heard about him perhaps trying to reverse himself. But as Callahan said, in his instance, he said, do you want to believe the government? Or in his instance, he said, or your lying eyes. In this case, of course, it would be your lying ears. But he is on tape, and there's no question in regards to him affirming the UFO activity that took place at Echo Flight. And by the way, for our listeners, these two events between Echo and Oscar took place 8 days apart. Is that correct, Bob? Yeah,
that's right. Echo Flight went down on the 16th of March, Oscar on the 24th.
Well, now that kind of pulls us up to the press conference. Why don't you explain to our listeners how that came about and what you hope to accomplish with that?
Well, Robert Hastings and I had been talking about, we've been collaborating for a few years, and finally we decided we had so many witnesses that could support the idea, not the idea, but the fact that UFOs had been seen at nuclear bases, that we thought, why not bring some of these people together, and we'll have a press conference and try to make this issue, make this a strong issue, and that's what we did. We just kind of, organized the thing. We planned it. We asked the public for donations. We decided we weren't going to associate ourselves with any particular group or take money from any particular groups. We wanted this to be a grassroots effort, and as it turned out, it was. We did get a substantial number of donations. In the end, Robert Hastings especially, had to go into debt a little bit, and I've gone into debt a little bit to make this happen, but we thought it was worthwhile. And as it turned out, it was.
Pardon me for laughing, but it brings up the notion that for the ignorant that's out there, that everybody thinks that there's just all these riches that are stowed upon the authors of UFO books, when quite frankly, when you put UFO in the title of most books, it's the kiss of death, with very few exceptions. And it just kills me, the intelligence of some of these characters. But God
true.
Bless you for doing that. And that's, that's the battle. People don't realize that people that take this this field, if we can call it that, seriously, there's no money in it, with very, very few rare exceptions. You're usually coming out of pocket if you care about it that much. And once again, I don't know how many times I've said it, and quite frankly, I've interviewed a lot of the people right here in the Joyner Report, that these instances have affected people's lives, their entire lives. I mean, obviously, as this incident for you has, and there's really a bigger theme to just the UFO event in regards to the government as a whole and the secrecy. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes. The government and the Air Force in particular is covering up what they know about UFOs, and in doing that, they're actually lying to the public about these objects and the phenomenon as a whole. To me, this is an abuse of secrecy. Government, obviously, the government agencies have the right to make things secret, and we do need secrets. I'm not saying we don't have to have secrets, but something like this, which affects the public as a whole, is really undemocratic, in my opinion, because it keeps the public uninformed about what their government knows about this very important topic. And as we know, an informed public is essential for good democratic government. And that's what really sticks in my craw, and one of the reasons I keep talking about this.
Well, and look, it's the last time I checked, or at least it's supposed to be we the people. This is a democracy, and these factions have to remember who they work for. And so I'm right with you in that regard, and I salute you, for those efforts. Was there? We've got about a minute left. Was there an interview in particular after the press conference? We're so used to having the media ask such stupid questions. Was there one that stuck in your mind that went the other way, that was a positive experience?
What was encouraging to me is that most of the interviews I had afterwards, and I had a bunch, believe me, we got inundated with requests for interviews, were very affirming, supportive. We didn't get laughed at, and I think it was because our witnesses were so credible. They all did an outstanding job, and my hat's off to them. I congratulate every one of them for a great job.
They were home run hitters. Real quick, Bob, what's your website where people can learn more about this? We've got just a few seconds left.
Yeah, spiralgalaxy.org. They can go and listen to the links to the testimony of each witness. They can see the report I wrote on the UFO cover-up by the Air Force.
And in addition to that, whatever isn't there between the UFO Chronicles and your site, we have a plethora of information in regards to the UFO nuke situation. I believe most of your articles that you've written are there. All of the articles that Robert Hastings has written are there. There's more information to come. You guys are going to be releasing some of the other audio recorded interviews that were done a little while back. On that note, Bob, we are at the top of the hour, and as usual, time has just flown by. I really want to thank you for participating in tonight's show, and I hope we can get back on this and pick it up again soon, where we're leaving off here. And just once again, my hat's off to you in regards to your service for this country, and I thank you so much for coming on the Joyner Report.
Thank you, Frank. It's really been my honor. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll do it again next time. And in our second hour, we will be joined by retired Colonel Dwin Arneson, another member of the group that testified in the recent press conference in Washington, as well as serving at Malmstrom Air Force Base during the missile shutdowns and the UFO activity. You're listening to the Joyner Report on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, WPRN-FM in New Orleans, and we'll be right back.
Into multifaceted possibilities. This program will broadcast live Saturday evenings on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
And we're back. I'm Frank Warren, in for Angela tonight, and you're listening to the Joyner Report on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, WPRN-FM in New Orleans. My next guest, retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Dwin Arnie Arneson, was the officer in charge at the Communications Center of Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1967 when he read a classified message concerning the sighting of a UFO hovering over one of the base's Minuteman I launch facilities, a.k.a. silos, just as several missiles mysteriously malfunctioned. Although Colonel Arneson doesn't recall the designation of the missile flight mentioned, researchers now know that two UFO-related full-flight shutdowns involving 10 missiles each took place at Malmstrom in March of that year at both Echo and Oscar flights. Arnie, I want to thank you for your service to this country and, like Bob, your courage to step up and share what you know with the American public. Welcome to the Joyner Report.
Well, thank you very much.
You know, I know that you've had, in talking to you privately, I know you've had a long interest in UFOs. I know you got involved early on, and I want to talk about that a little later. What I would like to do, I'd like to just work backwards. If you wouldn't mind, could you explain to our listeners how you got involved with the press conference?
Well, as it happens, I got involved through Bob Salas. Bob and I have been friends for about 10 years. We were witnesses for Dr. Greer back in 2001 at the National Press Conference also, and when he testified to the same thing as I have testified to. And so we've been in contact for about 10 years on this, and as it happened, that's the reason he said, how about being a witness on this particular effort? And I said, well, if you feel I'm worthwhile, I guess, put me on. So that's how we got involved.
You know, having watched that when it was a webcast, which of course was a new thing back then, Greer, as a researcher and his involvement in ufology, takes a lot of flack. But one thing that he did get right was putting that group of witnesses together, in my personal opinion. I thought that had a great impact in regards to the caliber of witnesses and who they were. Putting that together in that way was just fantastic. And, of course, which segues into the event that happened at the Washington Press Club in September. Go ahead and if you would, just take us back to that day in March '67. What basically happened from your perspective? Well,
basically, I was the Communication Electronics Officer in charge of the Communications Center at the 28th Air Division in Great Falls, Montana. And what happened in that, we get hundreds of messages a day that came through our communications center from all over, and one of the responsibilities I had was to review the messages, to make certain that our internal procedures were proper and all this or that, and do some follow-up if need be. So I happened to come across that message, and I said, wow, Now, I didn't know Echo flight from Oscar flight or anything else, so I couldn't relate to that. As part of my responsibilities in that job, I was also the top secret control officer for the division. I was the cryptographic officer, that is, I passed out nuclear launch authenticators to the various SAC missile crews and the fighter interceptor squadrons. And so I was involved somewhat with the SAC people. But
well, you had a serious job, in other words. I mean.
Well, it was pretty. When you pass out nuclear launch authenticators to the SAC missile crews,
that's pretty damn serious.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah.
You have to have two-man control procedures and all this and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, you have to have I had a top secret crypto clearance at that time. I had a higher clearance later on in my career, but that was pretty good for beginners.
Was there an average could you label an average or associate an average of communication or communiques on any given day?
Oh Lordy, no, there were hundreds on a given day from all over the country. No, I can't give you an average.
What I'm getting at, I'm wondering if there was a spike during the missile shutdowns, as you would think there would be.
Well, yeah, you would think so. I didn't key upon that, but I can see where you come from in that respect, and I never went back to do any checking on that. No, I have no idea if there was or was not.
Well, so when you see these, when you see the communiques, I mean, what's going through your mind?
Well, back in those days, there was kind of a lid put on any kind of UFO kind of stuff. You know, people, they say, don't get involved. It was not a written policy that I can recall, but you know, don't talk about UFOs. And if you saw one, forget it. And then it was kind of put the kibosh on if you had any kind of knowledge of that kind of stuff. It wasn't talked about very much. It was discouraged, in fact.
Well, actually, you had the AFR 200, where typically it was military law. You could get fined and penalized in a number of ways. So that wasn't just said. That was you can go to AFR 200, which actually I think was born in the 50s. Now, opposed to Bob, now of course you got involved with UFOs earlier on, so I would say that you were more open-minded when these events took place in '67.
More open-minded about what?
Now, but Bob, for example, if you heard, I don't know if you listened to the first hour, but when he first got the call from the guy up top side, and this guy is reporting a UFO, Bob, like Walt Fink, for that matter, he just dismissed it. He didn't take it seriously. You had more knowledge about UFOs in '67 than most, I would imagine.
Oh, I see where you're coming from.
You understand?
Yes, I certainly do. Yeah, I had an interest in UFOs that goes back, back to the early 50s. I was, in fact, part of the, I guess, one of the original members of the NICAP. That was Major Keyhoe's organization.
Right.
The National Investigation Committee on the Aerial Phenomena.
That's correct.
So
right.
I had an interest in that long before the thing took place back in March of '67.
And I want to get to that in a minute. You had some interesting anecdotes that we'll get to, but back to '67 just for a moment. One of the other things that people forget, naysayers in regards to UFOs tend to put blinders on, and one of the things that has been established in regards to the reports, both from mainstream newspapers and things that have been culled out of Project Blue Book, was there was a lot of UFO activity across the state of Montana in March of 1967. Do you recall any of those events outside of your job in regards to the communications?
No, I don't recall, I'll be honest.
Well, that's okay. The point being was that there was, in fact, actually, in one instance, Malmstrom sent helicopters out. There was an in fact, they sent a strike team out to the one incident at Belt, Montana, and there was another one where they. I have the newspaper reports out of that at the UFO Chronicles, where they literally did UFO investigations in the month of March 1967. And the point that I'm trying to make out of this, to get it right in the average person's mind's eye, you've got all these missile silos spread out in Montana. I think what the Oscar flight was near Roy, Montana, and to this day I think it's a population of about 200 or 300 people, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty sparse. So anything a lit up UFO at nighttime, could be seen for miles. I mean, they call it the Big Sky Country for a reason. But there was in fact a lot of activity in that month. So it's not a stretch to understand why security personnel that were topside in regards to missile silos would see something. Of course, in the specific instances that we're referring to in regards to Echo Flight or Oscar Flight, they saw something up close and personal, opposed to in the distance. But from that point on, was that a major effect for you? I mean, was that something that got your attention at the time, and then you set to the wayside, or what?
It got my attention, but the thing was, in the communication electronics field, especially as regards crypto and whatnot, it was ingrained in us to, what you see here, leave here.
Right.
Don't talk about it afterwards, because we worked with top secrets so much. That's just the way it was.
Sure. Yeah. When was the next time that you recall hearing anything about the events of March 1967?
Well, as it happened, after I retired from the Air Force, I went to work for Boeing as a computer systems analyst, and one of my first supervisors at Boeing was Mr. Bob Kaminsky. Mm-hmm. Now, as it happened to be, we were good friends when I worked for him, and then he retired, and he lived close by me here in Washington State, and on different occasions we would get together for breakfast and talk over things, and come to find out, he was the engineer that Boeing sent to investigate the missiles, the missiles being shut down.
Right.
And on different occasions, he told me, he says, those missiles were perfectly clean. They did not go down by themselves. And then he said, halfway through the investigation, the Air Force sent Boeing a message saying, stop the investigation and do not, he says, and do not repeat, not send us a report.
Yeah, he wrote that. He affirms that in his book, which I have. The title escapes me. And we also, as I mentioned in the first hour, we have a snippet of an interview that he did years back, prior to his passing, obviously, where he again affirms in his own words, not only does he affirm the missile shutdown, but he also talks about the UFOs in close proximity as he heard it at the time. And the other thing, he stands with the majority that says these incidents were rare. I mean, malfunctions were rare, period. And, of course, 10 missiles going down was unprecedented. It just didn't happen, as everybody would tell you.
Yeah. No, there were so many safeguards on those missiles, and the redundancy, the duplication and whatnot, it was absolutely fantastic. I didn't have any idea of how complex those things were. In a later assignment, when I was a missile launch officer at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we used to launch space satellites from there, and I got an appreciation then how complex these missiles were.
Right. Now, what year was that with Kaminsky that you met up with him? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Well, that was Lordy, that was I don't know, in the late '90s, I guess it was.
I see. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was considerably after 1967, because I retired from the Air Force in 1986, so it must have been in the early '90s that Bob and I got connected with that. But he told me that personally on different occasions, so I'm an eyewitness to that, or ear witness, or whatever we want to call it.
Sure. Well, now, in addition to that, as time goes by, you heard that from Kaminsky. We know that the Fowler snippet was put in Timothy Good's book. When was the next time that you heard something about that, about the Echo Flight incident and or Oscar Flight?
I cannot recall on that. I'll be very frank. When Bob testified to it, of course, I guess that's the next time I really heard about it, back in 2001.
So somewhere, say 2000, 2001, 1999 is when you guys got together?
2001 is when we got together.
Yeah.
In fact, as it happened, I happened to hear him on the Art Bell show, and I kept hearing about this guy talking about missile silos and being, shut down or whatnot. I kept thinking, who in the heck is this guy? And Art Bell did not like to use last names with people that he interviewed. It was a Bob, so
right.
So he was interviewing this Bob guy about Bob Salas, of course. And then later on, the second guy that came on the radio was also a Bob. And later, after I listened to that, I said, well, I know that voice. And that was Bob Kaminsky. That was the engineer who also came on to the RPL show that night. And that's how I got in contact with Bob Salas. He used to live up here in Bellevue at that time.
Yeah. We were talking about that, the Art Bell interviews during the break. There's actually meaning behind that madness in regards to not using somebody's last name. As the editor, publisher of the UFO Chronicles, we get UFO reports all the time. And as a rule, I always post the reports anonymously unless somebody bends my arm to put their name in it. And what I've found, and particularly depending on somebody's position, if they're military or a corporate head or what they might be, they don't want their name out in the public domain attached to a UFO story, contrary to popular thinking. People do not want to be attached to, the stigma, actually, of ufology. And I found that publishing the reports this way, we get a lot more people that it frees them up to share the information. And I always tell them, look, if you want me to use your name, I'd be happy to do so. But as long as I have to know their name, obviously, and depending on the anecdote, particularly if it's a military situation, then of course we'll vet them properly and so forth and so on.
Right.
But there is a reason for that, and we end up getting more witnesses that way. And speaking of which, one of the things that I mentioned this in the first hour, we did get another report in, and I have not vetted the witness entirely just yet, but I feel very good about it, of another missileer that had a very similar experience to Bob's and/or Walt Fiegel's and/or Carlson's. At another Air Force base altogether, not Malmstrom. This isn't another missileer that, as a witness to one of those events. This is a completely separate event at another Air Force base in the late 60s that had to do with UFOs in close proximity to the missile silo and the missiles malfunctioning. So I'm looking forward, and by the way, this was completely precipitated by the press conference. This guy, a friend of this guy, heard about the press conference, read a couple of my articles, read the press release, and he reached out to me and said, I know this guy. And I've since spoken with him, and I asked him if he could arrange a meeting. He's done that. So far, everything sounds real good. I feel real comfortable with this. I don't think there's any funny business. The first guy checks out. The information that I've got so far all checks out. But, we're still a ways from it, from confirming everything. Of course, I'd have to see a DD-214, et cetera, et cetera. But it's looking good. The main point is that that sharing the information and you guys having the courage to step up and come forward and share this information, it's had positive effects. And hopefully more and more people specific to this subcategory of ufology in regards to, UFOs and nuclear weapons or nuclear facilities will, more and more people will come forward after they see that you guys have stepped up to the plate. And I can't thank you enough. It takes courage, literally, to get out and do that. A lot of people don't think so, but it does, particularly for somebody in your position.
I didn't think it did, but I guess people say it does. I don't know.
Well, it does. People are afraid of the stigma that's attached to it. You're a retired colonel. People that have titles or depending on somebody's position where they work, they don't want that rubbed on them. And of course, a good many people will speak confidentially. They don't want to go public. It takes, I think, it takes a lot of courage to step up to the plate like you did. And God bless you for doing it. But take us back. Let's go back to NICAP. When did you first get involved in ufology to begin with?
No, that was shortly after the Roswell thing. I was just a youngster at that time, but I read that report and I says, something doesn't sound right there. So I don't know. I was always interested in astronomy and whatnot. In fact, when I was 12 years old, I built my first telescope out of a piece of tubing, and it was very, very crude. And I can recall many a night back in the winter, back in Minnesota, being out there with my telescope, just freezing my fanny off and looking at the moon and whatnot. And they say it was very crude, but I made it happen. I was just always interested in that stuff at a very young age for some reason.
Did you have any sons back in those days yourself?
No, not at all.
Now you joined NICAP early on in the 50s. Did you ever meet Keyhoe?
No, I did not. I have his books, but I never met the man personally. I do have an audio tape someplace in my archives here between Major Keyhoe and Lieutenant Colonel Spence Whedon that I found very interesting. That happened later, a long, long time ago. He had an interview on the Armstrong Circle Theater back in the 1950s between the two of them, and that's a different story in itself.
Right.
Hello?
Interviews with Keyhoe. I'm still with you, Arnie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Anyway, for the benefit of our listeners, I do have one of the interviews posted at the UFO Chronicles. I do not have the one that you have, and if you can find that, I would be happy to digitize that for you.
I will look for it.
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting. What was your capacity in regards to to NICAP? Were you a field investigator or?
No. I was just a member. I was so young at that time. I must have been, 13, 14 years old, something like that. But no, I was in no capacity of any kind, just a member.
Well, you were caught up in it like the whole country was at that time. This is something that, of course, a lot of our younger listeners aren't aware of. The UFOs, or back then flying saucers, didn't get shuffled to the back page. It was front page news, and people wanted to know what was going on. I mean, from the summer of '47, what we deem modern day ufology, beginning with Kenneth Arnold's sighting, up to '52 and thereafter. In fact, the largest press conference post World War II happened in the summer of '52 in Washington, and it was all about flying saucers. People wanted to know, which, by the way, Keyhoe attended that conference. He was in the audience as a journalist, and people wanted to know what was going on. The military at least overtly claimed to want to know what was going on. In terms of shoving this under the rug, that really wasn't in play just yet. That didn't come in till the Robertson panels get together in '53. But I just find it interesting from somebody that has lived through that area or time period, I should say. You felt it. You saw what was going on. Not a couple of years back, we published a piece on all the activity that took place in the summer of '52, and a reader came in and chimed in on that, and he said, as a young man, he was driving with his family, and he says, people don't get the gist of what was going on. Of course, this is when when we were sending aircraft out chasing flying saucers, literally, back in the summer of '52. And this gentleman, a young man at the time, says he recalls his family, his dad pulling over on the side of the road in that vicinity. I forget the exact area. I think he said he was next to the Potomac. And he says everybody on the road literally pulled over and got out of the car to look up at these things. Mm-hmm. And he says you never get the gist of it reading some of these reports, but he says this was serious business, and these things were all over the place, and everybody knew about it. You know, this wasn't something like today that gets put on page 27. He says, you know, it was the talk of the town, and you know, nobody knew. You know, the military were chasing after these things, but nobody had an explanation, and so you literally lived through that time period.
Well, I guess part of it also was the situation between us and Russia at that time. You know, we didn't know if they were Russians or what, so I think that probably contributed to it.
Well, and that's true. That there was common thinking at the time. Of course, if we go back to Project Paperclip, you know, let's face it, the Germans put us on the moon, and of course, Russian scientists and German scientists rather, were split between us and the then Soviet Union. And so we didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't know what we were doing. Or I mean, there's a lot of speculation. But yeah, and again, that's another thing in regards to explaining the flavor of the times. You know, the beginning of the Cold War and how tense everything was back in those days. And you know, and let's face it, we've all got new missiles. We were testing missiles out in New Mexico, and most certainly a lot of the sightings were. Post-investigation, you know, would have a conventional explanation. The higher percentages always have, but it's that smaller percentage of UFO sightings that didn't and still don't to this day, which of course is what we're interested in. Yeah. But how long were you in NICAP? When did that peter out?
Oh, Lordy, just a few years. I was heavily involved in high school or whatnot at that time, so I don't recall when it petered out, but I don't think it lasted that much longer. It was probably in the late 50s that it probably petered out.
Now, did you get away from ufology altogether at that point, or?
Well, no. I've had an active interest in it for about the last 60 years thereabouts. I've read an awful lot about UFOs. I could talk about UFOs for hours, I guess, on end, so to speak. But it's always been an interest of mine.
We do get spitting, don't we? You shared an interesting anecdote with me privately when you were stationed at Wright Pat. Is that something we can talk about?
If you want to.
Lay it on me. I thought that was rather interesting.
Well, it's your nickel. So, basically, I mentioned an interview between Major Kehoe and Lieutenant Colonel Spence Wheaton. Back in the 80s, late 80s time frame, I was assigned as the director of logistics at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. My daughter was a senior in high school in Oklahoma City at that time, so I did not take the family and move them to Dayton, Ohio. I just took an unaccompanied tour as a holiday in the Air Force. I happened to get a room. This one lady called, her name was Chris Wheaton. As it turned out, she was the widow of Lieutenant Colonel Spence Wheaton, and she had rooms for rent. So she had 3 bedrooms, and I took her up on the offer, and I kind of became her son. I had nothing better to do. She had something like 12 peacocks and 6 dogs and 5 cats and everything else. And she had about a 5-acre plot outside of Dayton, Ohio. And as I say, I kind of became her son. I helped her cut the wood, I cut the grass, and various things. As it was, she was from England originally, and she liked to have Saturday night parties every couple of weeks or so. And a lot of the people that were invited over there were retirees that either worked with or for her husband before he passed away. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys that I happened to meet was they call him Dr. Adolf Raum. He was, at that time, he was about 86 years old, just as sharp as a tack. He was actually born in Switzerland. He was a friend of Dr. Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
He was also on the first A-bomb test in the U.S. He knew Dr. Oppenheimer personally. And one night, after our dinner, we had a couple of drinks, and I happened to get a hold of Adolf, and I said, we became very, very close friends, as it was. And I said, Adolf, what about these little green men that are supposedly on ice here at Wright-Patterson? And his face turned ashen white almost instantaneously. And he said, Arnie, he says, all I'll say is that they were not weather balloons. Then he got very, very stern, and he says, and we will never talk about it again. You understand? In his kind of Swiss German dialect or whatever. But I touched a nerve of some kind with him. Now, I don't know what the relationship was between he and Colonel Spence Whedon. I could never find that out. Nobody ever said. I think that there must have been some kind of relationship there. Lieutenant Colonel Whedon was what I called Mr. UFO at Wright-Patterson back in the 50s time frame. He briefed all the generals about UFO activities and whatnot. And I guess that's why the Armstrong Circle Theater made this interview between he and Major Kehoe. And as I say, I will try to find that tape and send it to you so you could take and digitize it and whatnot.
Well, that would be great, yeah. Well, interestingly, the doctor, as we say, given what you just said, he had street cred, being involved with the Manhattan Project and that kind of thing. It just makes you wonder, given all the stories at Wright Pat, what's your take on all that? Do you think there's anything to the extraterrestrial stories in regards to bodies and that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, I can't prove any of it, but I have a strong belief that in fact something was found by somebody and they were taken someplace, and they're probably still on ice someplace. I don't know, but I've always believed that. As I say, I have no proof of any kind.
Some of the researchers that I work with different people on different cases, and in regards to the Roswell case, we do have a witness who claimed that her father was involved with Roswell, and that they would move evidence in different parts of the country for various people to analyze. And part of that evidence was, in fact, bodies, based on this individual's account. And but she mentioned certain locations across the country, and that they would rotate this. In other words, the evidence was not kept in any one place for any length of time, at least to her father's involvement in this. And she made it clear, and this makes sense, of course, in regards to compartmentalization and classification. She made it clear that at least with her father's peers, that no one person had all the pieces of what was proverbially speaking. Everybody was working on different slices of what was going on. Nobody at his peer level had a clear picture of what was happening. Obviously, be somebody's superiors. Now, and we checked into her father's credentials, and he certainly was who he said he was. And all of this, it just sounds very, very intriguing. Of course, it's primarily anecdotal. We did get verification of his credentials. He was where he said he was in regards to where he was in the military, and then later as a private contractor, some of the firms that he worked with. So it gets really intriguing when you hear some of these stories, and in regards to if they're authentic or not. But Aside from Wright Pat, just in general, Arnie, given your rank, now you retired as a lieutenant colonel, correct?
Right.
In your capacity under that rank, did you ever experience any UFO minutia in any regard as a lieutenant colonel or below, going up the ranks?
Well,
aside from the 67 incident.
Right. In the mid-70s, I was a commander of the radar squadron close by Loring Air Force Base, Maine. And Loring was active at that time. It was a SAC missile or a SAC bomber base. And my security comp and I, on a periodic basis, had a need to meet with the security police over at Loring Air Force Base. And I can recall on 2 different occasions them telling us that they had actually seen UFOs over the missile storage or over the nuclear storage areas at Loring Air Force Base. I don't know if there were any reports ever written about that. I don't know if any of the weapons were degraded by the UFO presence of any kind, but I do recall them telling both of us about UFO activities over Loring Air Force Base.
So once again, we have a UFO nuke connection.
Yes.
And that, quite frankly, that's the preponderance of the evidence. This is a repetitive action where there's a history, there's a pattern in regards to UFO activity pertaining to either nuclear weapons facilities and or just nuclear facilities and the manufacture thereof. For example, the sightings that were at Hanford in Washington, the plutonium plant there, or the Savannah River Project. All these things happened from 47 on. You had Oak Ridge in Tennessee, repeated UFO sightings. Los Alamos, Roswell, of course, later Walker, on and on and on again. And I can't, we touched on it a little bit in the first hour with Bob. If UFOs can affect nuclear weapons, and I asked Bob point blank when he was in the silo, I said, there was a time when if you had to launch nuclear weapons in your capacity, with your job, you couldn't do it. Is that correct? He said, that's correct. The same, of course, we know happened at Echo. Missiles would not have been able to have been launched. So if that doesn't affect national security, I don't know what does. So the notion, the official position of the Air Force, and with the conclusion of Project Blue Book under the Condon Report, stating that UFOs are not a threat to national security, is just a bunch of hogwash. Because we have so much proof, to the otherwise. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, the powers that be don't want to admit it.
No, and of course we've, that's gone on for generations, and this just continues to go on. What if you had your way in regards to the press conference you participated in? What would you like to see happen from that? I mean, what would be the best case scenario? That did get a lot of attention with mainstream media. There, as Bob said, there was some good, salient interviews opposed to the nonsense that we oftentimes get. But what would you, if you had your way, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I guess idealistically, I would like the government, the U.S. government, that is, to come forth and actually, tell the truth about some of these things. But I don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think they have the backbone and want to take the risk to have any kind of disclosure activities come forth because of the political, the religious, different aspects. I don't know if we're ready for it as a nation or as a world, if we're ready to have the truth revealed. I'd like to see it happen, but I don't think it ever will.
Sadly, I tend to agree with that. I really think, I've often said that a grandiose event would have to take place for people, to notice. But really, there have been a lot of grandiose events, technically, that have taken place that still get shoved to the wayside. Stephenville, in recent times,
Right.
that was a very noticeable event. And again, what really became of that? We did get a new wave of researchers and people interested in the story. I mean, quite frankly, the Joyner Report, the very show we're on, was born because of the Stephenville incident. But that was a pretty significant incident. I mean, we had planes chasing this large UFO. That was in close proximity to the presidential ranch, yet that one slipped by. And what has things, do we know more as a people? Did the government step up to the plate and admit anything? No. You can go a little bit further back, and a case that very similar to Stephenville was the Phoenix Lights. And these basically are technically in relatively near times, opposed to the 40s or 50s, and that was a most significant event. And what a lot of people don't realize is that instant, the reports of these large V-shaped or boomerang UFOs, not only, it was much larger than Phoenix. It went across, not only did it go across the state of Arizona, it actually went in various states, and there were reports coast to coast in the spring of '97. Right. Here again was an instance where something could have been said, something could have been admitted, and yet, although that did garner public attention for a pretty good long time, and still does to some degree, that went by the wayside. I mean, we've got the letters from Senator McCain that said, well, we kind of looked into it, nothing became of it, and then just put it to the wayside. So, unfortunately, I take heed to what you say. I'm wondering if we're going to hear something in our lifetime.
I don't know. I recall back, kind of a sidelight here, but back in 2001, when I was with Dr. Greer, Bob Solis and I were with Dr. Greer back at the National Press Club, the lady that sponsored Dr. Greer into the National Press Club, and I forget her name, she has since passed away, but she was the one that used to be in the front row of all the presidential, news conferences, and she would say, Mr. President, Mm-hmm. Anyhow, she got him aside one time, President Clinton, and said, when are you going to take and tell the public about the UFOs? And he told her, he says, there is an element of the government that I have no control over, and I can do nothing about it. That is what President Clinton told her about the UFO situation.
Well, I'm having a little brain cramp on the gentleman's name that of course, labeled the president's temporary occupants of the White House. So that, of course, makes a world of sense. It harkens back to Project Shamrock. With the NSA, when they were literally intercepting all of the cables from U.S. citizens and literally recording them, and no sitting president was aware of that up until Nixon. Nixon finally found out about that, and presidents would come and presidents would go while this illegal activity went on, which, by the way, was in part done by several large corporations at the time. Completely against the laws of this country, an invasion of privacy and literally constitutional rights, yet they did it, and no president knew about it until Nixon became aware of it. And these are the things that we know about, much less the things that don't see the light of day.
What you say is true. In my capacity in the communication world, I knew about those things many, many years ago, decades ago. Yeah. But I could say nothing because of my clearance.
Right. Well, I don't know. I guess it's sad in a sense. During the break, Bob and Joe and I were talking. what do we do? But we have to chip away at it. And I think that's all we can do. And there are, even in chipping away at it, positive things do come about. I mean, we did, this last press conference, a couple new witnesses have stepped forward, and not only the witnesses themselves. This is something I was talking about with this particular witness that reached out to me, or the friend of the witness, I should say. I was explaining to him, the friend, that what happens with a new set of circumstances, we get new clues to work. And I was actually pleased in the sense that this particular witness was coming from a different Air Force base, because that gives us a whole new location to file Freedom of Information Act requests. We have kind of fresh ground to work.
Right.
So I'm real excited about what's going to take place with that. And of course, the flip side, he may have come back. I mean, had he said, well, I was there at Echo, or I was there at Oscar, then it's another witness to further shore up the events that happened in those cases. Mm-hmm. But in either case, it's a fresh voice that hopefully will be added publicly. I have explained to this witness that, however he wants to handle that, his confidentiality, of course, will be guarded if that's how he chooses, although I would prefer that he go public. But I understand completely, given his position.
The thought that comes to mind, the only way to eat an elephant is a bite at a time.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Really, it's simplistic, but it's very, very truthful.
No, that's absolutely right. And well, we've been going after this thing. Again, we were saying this during the break that what's old is new again. A lot of people that are new to the field, they think all these things are new, when in fact the very same arguments were made 60 years ago. There were, you can go back and read articles at the time where the ufologists of the day really felt that there was going to be disclosure at any minute. And that was 60 years ago.
Yep.
They thought, well, my God, they're going to say something. Look at all this activity. The powers that be are going to have to come clean. And you could see that time and time again, not only in the print media, but all the books that were being written at the time. Amen. They were going to spill the beans any minute, and here we are 60 plus years later having the same conversation, for God's sake.
Very true.
Yeah, it's well, Arnie, is there anything going on that you're going to be involved in here in the very near future?
No, just retirement.
Well, I mean, in regards to ufology, I know you got involved in that early on, and we all certainly appreciate that involvement. But
no, I'm going to continue to be involved as best I can, or keep researching it. I find it to be a very, very fascinating topic that if I knew what they are, where they're from, why they're here, I wouldn't be where I am right now, I'll tell you that.
Well, now, one thing that did happen in the press conference is, and God bless Robert Hastings for this, he makes no bones about it. He is not, as what Stan Friedman would call a apologetic ufologist, or a ufologist apologist. He just lays it on the line, and he does. He makes it clear that he believes he supports the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He believes perhaps that whoever's driving these UFOs around have an interest in our nuclear weapons ambitions, and perhaps that they're giving us a hint. What do you think about that?
Well, I think they're trying to send us a message of some kind, like, hey guys, knock it off. You don't need these things. Where they're from, are they extraterrestrial? I don't know. Are they from a different dimension? Maybe. Are they from the inside the earth? Maybe. Who knows? If the fact is, they've been around for hundreds of years, and they have been watching us. Maybe they are, if not thousands, yeah. You go back into the ancient texts of India. They were there then. This is 5,000 years ago, the amount of...
Well, I have expanded my definition of extraterrestrial, and basically what it includes is anything not us. So when I say ET or extraterrestrial, I just throw a blanket over it, and it's anything not us, because look, I don't know where they're coming from. I don't think there's enough data on the table for anybody to tell us where they're coming from.
That's exactly right.
In any event, Arnie, we are at the end of our hour. It zipped by again as it did the first hour, as I know it would. And we are at the end of another great show. And I just really appreciate you coming on. And like Bob, I hope I can get you back here in the near future and we can continue this worthwhile conversation.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Well, and thank you, Arnie, for coming on, and my thanks to Bob Salas as well. A special thanks to Angela for allowing me to keep her seat warm, and, of course, to you, the listeners. Angela will be back next week with yet another fascinating guest. I'm Frank Warren for the Joyner Report. You're listening to the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, WPRN New Orleans. Until next time, good night.
Are you interested in a radio program that focuses on the deeper aspects of the UFO topic? Would you like to explore the facts and truths of what ufology and UFO research are all about? Then, join us here every Saturday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network for Eye to the Sky, UFO Synopsis, with your host, G. Andrew. Radio program that looks at the UFO topic from a fresh perspective. Sound interesting? Then join us here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network every Friday evening at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central for The Joyner Report, hosted by journalist and researcher Angela Joyner.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hey, hi there. Got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious.